Hello? Can somebody hear me?
We hear you well, Sam.
Hello, Blenda, can you hear me? All right, so we start. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, friends. And welcome to our maiden meeting of the Virtual Working Group on Issues of Concern. My name is Sam Edukumi from Ghana. I work with the Environmental Protection Agency under the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation. I'm also the second focal point for Ghana. Friends, colleagues, as we are all aware, with the restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic, fourth meeting of the intersessional process considering the SciChem and waste chemicals, some chemicals on waste beyond 2020, IP4, and the fifth session of the ICCM5 or ICCM5 is not able to come on, but has been postponed. For that matter, the Bureau
There seems to be a problem for Sam. I don't know, maybe Thomas, you want to just start by introducing yourself as well?
There are two co-facilitators for each virtual working group, and we are expected to guide the discussions and recommendation outcomes with the support of the Secretariat. These outcomes will be presented in meeting documents and discussed at IP4 in March 2021 in Bucharest, Romania. I co-chair the virtual working group on internet issue of concern with my colleague and longtime friend, Mr. Thomas Jare Svier from Norway. To emphasize, these groups are not in any way intended to replace formal face-to-face discussions at IP4 or negotiations that will take place in ICCM5, but rather to further build understanding and prepare delegates for these important negotiations. A number of inputs have already been received from several and diverse stakeholders, which is an indication of the importance all about attached to our working group on issues of concern. Once again, on behalf of my able co-chair, I welcome you all to today's discussion. The agenda will be shown on the screen by the Secretariat. So at this juncture, may I kindly ask the Secretariat to provide the rules of the virtual meeting for the day and introduce us all to the next agenda item. Thanks so much for your kind attention. Secretariat, please.
Thank you very much, Sam. Maybe if we could just go to the agenda slide for a brief moment, just back one slide, please. Just to go over the agenda quickly here, we have 6 agenda items, which we will start with just giving an overview of the group. Then we will provide a presentation of just the schedule of the meetings of the virtual working group and just clarify any questions of process from participants so far. Followed by that, we'll go straight into the discussions at hand on the issues of concern and spend most of the 2 hours on that. We'll look at Annex B and identify areas of convergence, areas where there might be gaps or divergence. And the co-facilitators will share some key messages on the electronic feedback. We will then go into discussion about the Annex B and about progress on issues of concern, take general views of the participants, etc. And we hope to spend most of the time on that today. We will just close by talking about next steps and how we tend to proceed. So if I just can turn to the next slide, please. I'm going to give a little overview on the mandate of Virtual Working Group 3, which is on issues of concern. And our mandate here is to make proposals that progress the work of this topic in the lead up to the intersessional process, building on Annex B of the compilation document 4/2 for IP4. The specific tasks of the group include to review Annex B, as I just said, identify possibilities for compromise or alternative texts in areas of divergence, or identify gaps, to look at drafting, developing proposals for draft procedures for identification, nomination, selection, review, and prioritization of issues of concern, determining the need for further work, and the duration for considering issues of concern, drawing on experiences from existing that are existing for point A, as well as to develop then finally proposals on how to deal with the existing emerging policy issues and other issues of concern. Also, as part of this dynamic, this does have possible links to the science policy interface and subsidiary and ad hoc bodies, so we must just take that into consideration as we work through the text. One comment before we move through the next slide is just to update you all. Sam, maybe I didn't update you prior to this, but at this stage, it's already been agreed by the Bureau that IP4 will not take place in Bucharest, Romania. So we are looking at the alternative arrangements on how IP4 will proceed, and that will be a decision that the Bureau must take in December and reflect upon how we proceed, both in the interim period with IP4 or with an alternative arrangement. So we are still working towards the date of the currently scheduled dates of IP4, because we could, of course, schedule something in an alternative online way. It's just not determined yet, and the Bureau will be looking at that in December. Next slide, please. Great. Just to also look at this, we wanted to just show you where the dedicated information is for this working group. There is a whole section on virtual working groups on our website. And this, of course, is virtual working group 3. And I just did a screenshot of where our issues fall under. And you'll see that there's information available generally, pre-session documents, the outputs. We will be drafting a short meeting report of this meeting. All of the presentations will be available. All of the stakeholder inputs are already available. And the list of registered participants is available on the website as well. You'll see on the right, you don't see the full calendar, but there is a calendar available there also to compare it to the other virtual working groups. And I'm sure many of you have already been participating in other virtual working groups. If you could move to the next slide, please. Finally, I just wanted to highlight a few of the pre-session documents that are available to you and are very important pieces for us to be reflecting on in today's discussion and as we work forward on issues of concern. So the first, of course, is reflecting on Annex B of the compilation of recommendations in SciChem/IP4/2. And that is certainly the key piece of information we'll be looking at. I also want to highlight that an assessment report on issues of concern has also been developed by UNEP in September 2020, and the report is linked to our pre-session documents, as well as resolution 3/2. So the resolution is actually 2/4, sorry, there's a mistake there. Resolution 2/4, aimed at emerging policy issues from ICCM2. Which does guide the current emerging policy issues and is important to reflect upon as we build on our future work. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a dedicated web page, which I showed on the previous slide. So that ends just my general introduction. Of course, many of you are participating in the other virtual working groups. So we have 4 of them: the virtual working group on targets, on governance, on issues of concern, and on finance. And we have a busy schedule with all 4 of these groups at the moment. And thank you all for your participation and active contributions. And we as a secretariat are doing our best behind the scenes to make sure the work of these 4 groups connects to the extent they need to, and look to you as co-facilitators to really help us move forward on these issues. So all 4 of the groups have 2 nominated co-facilitators that are supporting the work of the development of the text, and are supporting the co-chairs of the entire intersessional process to help advance this work in the meantime. And we're lucky to have Sam from Ghana and Thomas from Norway in supporting us here. So we look forward to working with you both. That's the end of my presentation, so I think we just move to the next slide. And back over to Thomas to walk through the meeting calendar and latest status of the group. So over to you, Thomas. Thomas, we don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you very much. Indeed, I'm looking forward to the physical meetings restarting. It won't be in Bucharest, that's a pity. But very much looking forward to seeing you all in person as soon as possible. Just very briefly on the calendar, thank you all for your written inputs. We've received written input from 12 stakeholders and or groups of stakeholders. And we've received input on 2 issues or 2 items. One is Annex B, and the second is on the existing emerging policy issues, now what to do with them. Now, this meeting today is dedicated to the first part of that. So that will be item A and B in the overview that Brenda just showed you of the mandate. And then on Monday, the 30th of November, you will see a draft proposal from Sam and me on what to do with the existing emerging policy issues. And that will then be based on the written inputs that we've received so far. Then we will have another virtual meeting on the 14th of December, where we will look at then the future of the emerging policy issues and only those. And then there will be, again, a deadline for feedback electronically on the text that we have issued on the 30th of November. And then not listed in this overview, it's in there now, good. So by the 8th of January, which is a pretty ambitious deadline for Sam and me, a draft proposal will be released on, the sort of consolidated inputs and proposals on all topics that we've discussed during this process up until the very deadline on the 20th of January. So the 18th of January, there will be our so far last meeting, our 3rd meeting, where you will once again be invited to participate and come forward with your views on that text presented on the 8th of January. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, there you see a list of the 12 stakeholders or groups of stakeholders who have provided their written input. So thank you. And then I think it's over to Sam.
Thank you so much, Thomas, my co-chair. So quickly, we'll move to agenda item 4. I would like to do a quick what we're supposed to be doing today, and then we will move from there. So first of all, we'll be looking at the definition. These are the proposed texts of the issues of concern. So we'll look at the definition. I think for now we have a definition from the IP4/2 document, which we have a number of brackets also there. So from there, we'll move on to the next item. Please, next item, please. Next slide, please. On the criteria, where we also have a number of issues there, which we'll be looking at, about 4 of them. So that is what our group is supposed to be doing, looking at criteria to be used during the process, and more or less scientific information that will be required. So we're looking at it briefly as well. The next one is about, next slide, please. The next one will be on the information requirements. And here we have a number of issues that will be more or less requirements for the information that's required or be demanded for the issues of concern. If there is if we have to nominate, compound or a chemical or material, for that matter, what are the information that requires? Scientific information, of course. And then the next one will be looking at also, the next slide, please. Look at the mechanisms for adoption of issues of concern and for monitoring the process. Here we'll be looking at the identification, the nomination, the selection, the review, and the prioritization. So the issues, the points you see on the slide on the screen are the things that we'll be discussing as part of our mandate. The next one, please. So, this part of the mechanism for adoption, so a number of proposals in there that we'll be looking at. And we'll move on to the next one, which is on the mechanism for implementation. So here, what are the mechanisms that we need to, as stakeholders, we need to go through for the implementation? The Secretariat, the ICCM issues, and the stakeholders, what they are supposed to also be playing, the role they are supposed to be playing. And we'll also be looking at the next one, which is on the tracking progress, which include monitoring and reporting against the milestones. Here we will be talking about how the Secretariat, in consultation with the multi-stakeholder committee, will oversee and report back from the stakeholders, and how will guide the progress towards implementation of the work plan through reporting, periodic reviews, and report on progress. And finally, we'll be looking at the criteria for determining the need for the work on an issue. Yes, so a number of them that we need to, go through as a group. Yes. So, we need to move on so quickly. I'll ask my colleague Thomas to take the next slide, and then from there we will go into the discussion. Thomas, please.
Thank you, Sam. I hope you hear me now. We thought it would be useful to have a reminder of the findings of the independent evaluation done on SciChem. And we see that among the two strengths identified, we find that it was considered a major success of SciChem that we had the EPIs and that we managed to identify those. That identification and having the EPIs resulted in raising these issues' international profile. The evaluation also found that there had been much collaboration between the SciChem stakeholders. Now, among the weaknesses, the evaluation found that there was limited, that the outcomes of the emerging policies issues were limited in their ambition and scope, perhaps notably because of work plans not being ambitious enough, or because work plans did not exist, they were not developed. Several activities were also delayed because of lack of funding and capacity in the lead organization to take the agendas forward. And there was also no common method for reviewing progress of the EPIs and for potentially sunsetting the activities. Next slide, please. And that's over to you again, Sam, I think.
Thanks so much, Thomas. So we are now entering into the discussion for the day. But before we will go there, we need to look at a quick overview of the inputs received from our 12 stakeholder groups. There were different views on the title and the need for a definition. Again, the question is what to do about the criteria. The next one is about the possibility to simplify the text, some of which may be too prescriptive. The option to use more text for resolution 2.4, that is tried and tested. Who made the decision? Is it the ICCM or who? The need to increase ownership and implementation of actions. Also, the need to review progress of implementation. And finally, the views on the current emerging policy issues. We are supposed to prepare a proposal based on the feedback received for the next meeting of this group. So we mentioned that we had 12 proposals or inputs, comments from our stakeholders. So these are, in essence or in summary, the things that were of concern regarding our group. So may I go back to Thomas to take us through the discussion items. Thomas, please.
Thank you, Sam. So as you can see on this slide, what we're looking for is general views and input. Some of you have provided rather detailed comments in the text itself, and that is welcome. But unfortunately, given the time constraints, it is very difficult for us to go line by line, although we would have wanted that. That is what we would have done in a contact group. But in this format, it's regrettably not possible. So we're looking primarily for general views and input. To the extent that you're able to, it would also be helpful to Sam and myself if you could also indicate where your proposals and where your positions deviate from the text which currently governs the EPIs. And that's the ICCM Resolution 2/4. Next slide, please. So here you have, thank you, here you have an overview of the text that we have today on the EPIs. And then to your right, you have the compilation document. You see the different structure. It would also be useful to note that there is indeed a definition for the EPIs, but that's in the annex. So what we will do then is to go through, as we've indicated, we will go through this text following the structure in the Annex B, starting with the title itself, and then open up one part of the text. So first the title, then the definition, then the criteria, then moving on to information requirements, and then finally looking at the mechanisms for adoptions, which is a rather big chunk of the text. I wanted, Brenda, if you could just, before we now open the floor, if you could just briefly inform us on how participants take the floor.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, Thomas. All of the interventions will be oral interventions today. We'll focus that way since it's an open discussion. And what we'd like to ask you to do is to use the chat box to let us know when you want to speak. So we'd like you to put your organization name in the chat box followed by your name. And I've done that in the chat box as a starting point for you to see that. So your organization followed by your name. Sometimes the raise hand function isn't working perfectly for all participants, so we're finding this process works better. The Secretariat will keep the list and call on stakeholders, and I'll call on you in probably about groups of 3 for the co-facilitators to get prepared for your interventions. And when I call on the groups of 3, we will be opening up your microphones. So please be aware your microphones will be open before you're actually called upon, and so just bear with that. And when you start your intervention, please also mention your name and organization before you begin your intervention. And you can also turn your camera on for your intervention. Please try to keep your interventions short. And your mic will be muted immediately after your intervention, but it may take a bit of time. So just try to remain quiet until you're sure your microphone's turned off. And then we'll move on to the next group of 3. So that's kind of how we're trying to manage the conversation in chunks of 3 for the co-facilitators. So I hope that helps, and I hope you saw my organization common name in the chat box now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brenda. So let's start. First of all, the title, Issues of bracket, International bracket Concern. There have been several views expressed in the written input on the definition, and the floor is now open on, on the title itself, not the definition as you see on the screen here. So the title, we would like views on the title.
So
perhaps
as
it
we
would be
get
useful to, perhaps we could remove the definition text because it's slightly, because we're discussing the title now, so it would be better not to have the definition text on the screen.
So you'd like to be on slide 20, I think. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so I see one intervention. I see my colleague Jacqueline Alvarez from UNEP would like the floor. So let's open up the microphone for Jacqueline. And I also see the United States, Laura Nazef would like the floor. So we'll start, I guess, with Jacqueline and over to Laura.
So good morning, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. Is that correct?
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you well, Jacqueline. Hello.
Hi. No, thank you very much first to the co-facilitators and the secretariat for the behind of the scenes work. We know it's a lot, and for the opportunity to take the floor. We were not expecting to be the first ones, but okay, we will go. In reality, our comment, and sorry for this, is not going into the title of this Annex B as such, but it's a question of process, because one of the big challenges we face when we look at the Annex as such is that the definition is talking about issues of concern of international, global, depending. But then when we go into the criteria, we are referring to physicochemical properties of substances. So there is a huge disconnection between one thing or the other. So to get the title right, or the sense of what this annex is talking about, we understand we might need to have a better understanding as well conceptually of what we are talking about, if it is issues in general or we are referring more to chemicals of concern. It's just then a question back to the co-facilitators at this moment. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jacqueline. We have Laura from the US, followed by Auden from Norway. Pass the floor to Laura.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. Laura Nazef, United States. Regarding the title, I think it should read issues of concern or interest, and we propose this because we think that including issues of interest in addition to issues of concern would encourage focused efforts on additional solutions and the implementation of sustainable approaches that would help to significantly advance progress on chemicals management. We think it's good to include this more positive approach as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Over to Auden, Norway.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to the co-chairs and to the Secretariat for your efforts in organizing the work in this virtual working group. We have submitted written comments as well, and we refer to them in this first round on issues of concern. And we will be quick. On the title, we would welcome not only addressing issues of concern after they have appeared, but we would also like to address the prevention of such issues from appearing in the first place. Therefore, we would prefer a title such as Issues for Common Action in order to embrace also the innovative thinking and the preventive solutions in the concept. Thank you.
I don't hear you, Brenda. Am I the only one not hearing you?
I didn't unmute myself. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you, Thomas. So I will just keep going through the speakers unless I hear otherwise from the co-facilitators if you wish to step in. But I hear next I have Japan, Mashida, and followed by Gilbert, who's representing IPEN on the phone. So first, the government of Japan, followed by Gilbert from IPEN. Is Japan unmuted? Mashida. Maybe we could go to Gilbert first and then back to Mashida. Is Gilbert, are you unmuted from Crepid? IPEN?
Yes.
Okay, great. We'll go to Gilbert first. So over to you, Gilbert, representing IPEN.
Yes, thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Sam, for this meeting. I'm speaking from CREP on behalf of IPEN, and I would like to mention that IPEN submit a comment on the issue of concern. And about the title, we would like to see the title be kept as issue of concern rather than issue of international concern, on the ground that it is already an agreed term by the International Conference on Chemical Management that was further clarified in the recent UN Environment Report in its Chapter 3 that indicate that issue of concern comprise both the emerging policy issue and the other issue of concern used under the previous cycle. So that is our main comment on this, to keep the term that we are used for and then that was previously agreed. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Gilbert. Before I give the floor to Japan, who I think her microphone is unmuted, I just would note that we have ICCA, Anastasia Swearingen, who's asking for the floor, followed by the United Kingdom, Claire Dixon. So first I give the floor to Mashida from Japan. I think your microphone's unmuted.
Thank you, co-facilitator and secretariat, and thank you for your arrangement for this virtual working group. I'd like to make a comment about title, issue of international concern. Japan proposes to replace international with global. International associates the relationship between two or more countries delineated at the border, but chemicals discussed here can diffuse across the border where is geographically connected. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. Next, I give the floor to Anastasia Swearingen from the ICCA. Anastasia.
Thank you, Brenda. I'd like to thank the co-facilitators and the Secretariat for bringing us all together for this meeting. ICCA just wants to support the comments made by the US and Norway on expanding this to allow for consideration of issues that might promote innovation and innovative solutions. We support the issues of interest proposal from the US.
Thank you, Anastasia. I then move to Claire Dixon from the United Kingdom. Claire, you have the floor.
Very much, yeah. Claire Dixon from the UK government here.
Claire, your voice is coming through quite softly. If you could speak up, please. Thank you.
Okay, I'll hold the microphone closer. Thank you.
It's much better, thanks.
Thank you firstly to Thomas and Sam for their work on this and the opportunity to participate in this virtual working group. We have submitted written comments which reflect this intervention, but with regards to the title, we would like to propose the term issues of concern that warrant global action. And this is because it places the emphasis on the action and progress being needed at the international level rather than the concern itself. We think that this helps to address the issue that was raised regarding the fact that the independent review suggested that there needs to be further action on some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I don't see any other names in the chat box, so just looking for that. Maybe in the meantime, I pass the floor over to Thomas for a moment, but I don't see any other names in the chat box on the title. Thomas?
Thank you, Brenda. And thank you, Jacqueline, for your question. It is, when you go through the text, it is not necessarily. It's a starting point for negotiations. So the question is more sort of, what do we want to do with this part of the Beyond 2020 instrument? And indeed, if you go into the criteria, you might also find parts of the definition on the information requirements and in item 4 that will not necessarily correspond to issues of international concern. So basically, when we open the floor for comments on the title, it's a question of what you see us doing with this part of the Beyond 2020 instrument, and if you would like to focus on issues of international concern as opposed to, for example, chemicals of concern, then perhaps some of the criteria may not fit. That's a question to the stakeholders, and ultimately something the stakeholders will have to decide upon once we reach ICCM 5. So I hope that was clarified and answered your question. Thank you. Are there any more hands raised for this? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I have 3 people noted. I have Argentina who's raised their hand. I have Switzerland, Michelle, and I have the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution. I believe it's Johanna. So Argentina, Michelle, and Gab. Please go ahead, Argentina.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Mr. Chairs and Secretariat. Good morning, everyone. Yes, we have a few general comments on the issue of the title and the scope of this annex. Regarding the word international, I think we have here 2 concepts, and some other interventions mentioned them. On one side, we have issues that global actions are needed or current global action, but there are also some other issues that may not guarantee global action, but they are still a problem in many countries throughout the world. And I can mention an example, lead in paint. Lead in paint has been addressed by SAICOM, UN nations, and many developing countries have received inputs and support to work to tackle this issue, but there hasn't been a global action on that. It has been country to country, and that I think should also be captured as an idea within the new framework. Regarding, I want to echo the previous comment made by Jacqueline on criteria. I know we will discuss this later, but if you see the listed criteria there, we are talking about chemicals of concern, not issues of concern. And I think that we should capture a more holistic idea which can compromise other things, such as, for example, circular economy, chemical leasing. These will be issues of interest that may also be tackled by this framework. So regarding the comments on the word issues of interest, we agree that this is an interesting option, but we do not want to lose the concept of the concern, because we need science-based information to take action. And regarding the comment on guarantee global action, we will be happy to discuss this, but it's our understanding that not only things that need global action, but also things that maybe should be dealt at the country level, but international cooperation could be done, should also be captured under the scope. Thank you, Secretariat and Chairs.
Great, thank you very much, Argentina. I have two more speakers on the list for the title, and I think we will close the list unless I see more on the title. And it's Michelle Sheeran from Switzerland, followed by Jill Hannah Gap. Michelle, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Brenda, and many thanks for the co-chairs and the whole secretariat for preparing this session, and also for the possibility to provide written comments before the start of this group. Switzerland, we have submitted written comments on some of the elements discussed by this group. And now I'd like to intervene for Switzerland regarding the title. We also believe, like it has been mentioned earlier, and I hear some background noise. I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but it seems to be better now.
It's better, yeah.
We would also like to echo the comment that issues of concern is a previously defined and agreed term in the SAICM framework, and it's therefore there is merit to keep it. There is clarity, and we would support this. At the same time, we would also like to support the comment made by Norway, where they say it's not just to address issues of concern, but there's a component of there needs to be prevention. So we would also support this, and therefore our proposal would be to have as the title, Preventing and Addressing Issues of Concern. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. And then I pass the floor to Jill Hannah. And I'm just checking whether, Sheila from ICCA, whether you want the floor following Jill or whether that was for Anastasia. Over to you, Jill. I have the impression there's an echo coming from you, Jill, but just to warn you. Okay, over to you, Jill.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever it is to everybody. My name is Jill Hannah. Several of you know me from a past life. I would like to assure you I am indeed retired, but I am now working for the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution. I would have liked to turn my video on, but I don't seem to be able to, because I would have proved that I'm now retired because my hair is entirely grown. Anyway, I thank you for this opportunity and the apologies of the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution that we did not make a written contribution at this point. We're rather up to our eyeballs in trying to produce a new version of the Lancet study on the relationships between health and pollution, but we will indeed be contributing to this process as much as possible, and if you will still accept some written contributions, we'd like to make some. We would we think that the points that Thomas and the UK made about taking up the outcome of the evaluation is very important. And the thing we find most important about the title and indeed the approach is to concentrate on the greatest priorities, because we perhaps have not done quite as well as we might have wished for when we set SAICM up in 2005, because efforts have been dispersed and money has been very much lacking, and both of those things need to be addressed. Of course, the first thing is to bring more money into the process. We therefore, for example, and I don't want to be rude to anybody by what I'm about to say, but I think it bears witness, it is that we have, for example, in the issues of concern have had for a very long time, lead in paint. Now, GAP's sister organization, Pure Earth, and UNICEF published in October, so after the background document for our for our work. It's a report, a very important report called The Toxic Truth, which looks at lead pollution generally in children. And to our horror, finds on the basis of absolutely respectable evidence that 1/3 of the world's children have a blood lead level above that which would trigger immediate action in the USA if that were found in children in the United States. Now, almost none of that is coming from lead in paint. It's actually coming from small kids playing in backyards where people are recycling batteries, used lead acid batteries. That's the major cause. There are some others, but lead in paint is way down the list. So we need to make sure we have a mechanism that is robust, and we'll make sure that we concentrate on the most important things and not just something that somebody brings into the process. And for that reason, we are very, very, because they're already doing some initiative on it. For that reason, we are very grateful to see the idea of criteria. But like UNEP, we are not sure that these are necessarily the right criteria. We won't go into that now, but for example, something around health effects would be a good overall criteria, which would pick up a lot of the kind of issues that people have been talking about. We understand that some organizations and countries have called for a more positive spin, particularly I'm thinking of Norway and Switzerland. That might be a very good thing to do. We don't necessarily have a suggestion. We will certainly look carefully at suggestions made. But I think it will be important to use the word international in there. International, from the perspective of GAP at least, is not about frontiers. It's about it being relevant in many places, though not necessarily globally. And that is why we would prefer not to use global, because that is about things like climate change, where emissions in one area go up all around the world, and you can't help that. So international, I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. Brenda, did we have another one on the list?
I believe I see Olga Sparanskaya, representing a number of NGOs, and then I think we can close the list on titles unless I see anything more. Please note in the chat box whether I've missed you. So over to you, Olga.
Yeah, I think we should close the list on the title now and then move on to the definition after. Thank you.
Okay, over to you, Olga.
Okay, thank you very much, Brenda. In our interventions that we made, like nearly each and every for discussing emerging policy issues and issues of concern, we highlighted that our focus is to reduce and eliminate risk. That is why we are looking for concrete actions and not just expression of interest. And we support Switzerland, and we think that, and we support IPAN as well, and prefer to stay with issues of concern, and also to include like prevention and addressing issues of concern in the title of Annex B. And also, like if we are looking at the previous documents, we use the term either emerging policy issues or issues of concern, but never issues of interest. So we prefer to stay with the definitions that have already been discussed and confirmed by stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We then move on to the definition. So the floor is open for views on the definition. And since time is limited, it's very good if you are not shy and just hit the floor as soon as possible.
Okay, I see a couple of people who've raised their hands now here in the chat. So I see Martha from Norway and Alison Kennedy from Canada. So let's start with that. First, Martha, Norway, then Alison Kennedy from Canada. Please go ahead, Martha.
Thank you, Brenda, and hello, everyone. I'll be short. Norway suggests to replace the current proposal for definition of issues of concern with the definition of EPIs from the annex to Resolution 4 from ICCM2 in the section B, submission of initial information. This is because we have experience with this existing EPI definition, and we have difficulties seeing any advantages with the proposed changes in the compilation document. We would therefore prefer to use the EPI definition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martha. Then I have Alison from Canada. Please have the floor, Alison. Hear you at this point. So please open the microphone for Alison Kennedy. If Alison, otherwise maybe I'll go to Laura Nazareth from the USA is the next to ask for the floor.
Thank you. We don't think a specific definition for issues of concern or interest is needed if the criteria are clear. But if there is a definition, we don't support the inclusion of a definition of chemicals because governments define chemicals differently. And also, we don't think a reference to differing scientific capacities is needed. And we'd also like to emphasize that the outreach and investment of time and resources should be reserved for the issues where there are significant impacts related to chemicals. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Just to clarify, I believe that was Laura from the USA. I think Alison's having a problem with her microphone, so the next speaker we'll turn to for now is George Karlaganis from UNITAR, and then hopefully Alison's microphone will be fixed up. So over to George Karlaganis, followed by Gilbert of IPEN. George, you have the floor.
Hello, Brenda, and everybody. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Actually, I would like to support the intervention of my colleague from Norway. I would also like to prefer to stick to the procedure we had on emerging policy issues. I think if we now start to go into a discussion on a definition, then also in a long discussion on criteria, it can be very difficult. I just remembered now that the European Union discusses now during 10 years about the definition on nanomaterials, whether it's 200 nanometers or not. So I really would prefer to go back to the system of EPIs. For UNITAR, it's very important that we don't lose the existing EPIs. I can make examples of endocrine disrupting chemicals or others. We went through a long process to get these decisions, and we would not like to go back to square one because we are far away of having a global implementation of these old EPIs, and for us it's important that we can continue our efforts, and it's important there is no divide also between industrial countries which are quite well organized and developing countries where we need really to continue our efforts. The efforts of implementations are, of course, depending on funding. So that's why I support the intervention of Norway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George from UNITAR. We are on the definition at this point, and I would ask for the next speaker to be Gilbert from IPAN, followed by Claire Dixon from the UK, followed by Alison Kennedy from Canada. Okay, so first over to you, Gilbert, IPAN.
Merci, Brenda. Thank you. About the definition, IPAN has a view that the current text is really complicated. The agreed text from ICCM 2 Resolution 2/4 is simpler and provides flexibility to delegate deciding on the future issue. I quote, an issue involving any phase in the life cycle of chemical and which has not yet been generally recognized, is significantly addressed or arises from the current level of scientific information and which may have significant adverse effect on human health and or environment. This definition is flexible enough to address other emerging subjects like polymers, non-chemical pollutants, and other cross-cutting issues. So we have an issue with the term significant. I quoted, may have significant adverse impact effect on human health and or environment. This significant is a really ambiguous term, but leave flexibility for the ICCM to judge this term. For instance, the EU in 2013 report entitled Interpretation of the World Summit for Sustainable Development 2020 Chemical Goal and Assessment of EU effort to meet the World Sustainable Development Commitment note that significant harm is something more than detectable, but need not to be at the level of serious or substantial. So this is our concern about the definition, and we are ready to provide some editorial or when we discuss the text in itself. So we have some suggestion of the writing of the text that we can discuss further in the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gilbert. The next speaker I had was, just for people's information, I had put in now in the chat box the definition from ICCM Resolution 2/4, just for everybody's quick access for feedback. Next has the floor is Claire Dixon from the UK, followed by Canada, followed by Michelle Sheeran from Switzerland. So over to you, Claire.
Thank you again. Just briefly wanted to add some support to the Norway position and agree that we should simplify this text that has been suggested and remove a lot of the additional wording that has been added from the original definition under ICCM 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Canada, Alison, are you able to work your microphone now?
Can you hear me now?
Wonderful. Hi, Alison.
Perfect. I'm not really sure what's going on there. Thank you and good morning. I wanted to just speak about the definition. When we look at what's in the text, it seems very long and quite convoluted now. It's got a lot of qualifiers that are unnecessary to make, and it just won't be workable. So in our view, we think that we can simplify that definition. It should still be broad enough to cover issues that the Beyond 2020 framework is going to be best positioned and frankly uniquely suited to make progress on, because it's a voluntary, multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral platform, and that makes it unique and that makes it powerful in what it can do and what it can accomplish as opposed to some other fora. So it should be broad enough that it can look at different issues, but then figure out which ones it can make progress on towards sound management of chemicals and waste. So it needs to be able to take in concerns that affect a broad range of stakeholders. It doesn't have to be limited to issues that impact all regions or those that require concerted global action by everyone, but ones where it can make a difference and make progress. So that is our main concern with the definition, and it is helpful to see the definition from IP4/2. I think that's much more simplified and closer to where we were thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. I then have Michelle from Switzerland, followed by Matthias from the European Union. And I think I missed you there, Matthias, so sorry about that. So first over to you, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Switzerland would also like to support the intervention of Norway and Canada and UNITAR and the UK. We think it would be important to continue using the definition that we have had up to now. We think it would be a lot simpler. Also, we don't see the advantage of what is being proposed in the draft now. The advantage is not clear, and it would be simpler to continue working what we have had. We would also like to support the intervention made by UNITAR that we should keep the issues currently under SAICM and not lose the work that has been done so far. And lastly, we would like to mention that the UNEP issues report, in our view, is a very useful and important report as it goes through the different issues of concern and that there's a lot of analysis done through this report. And we would think it'd be really important that this report can be presented to the stakeholders of this working group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I then have Matthias from the European Union who wants to take the floor. And I don't see any other hands up for, oh, I have Anastasia from the ICCA has their hand up for this on the definition. So over to you, Matthias, and then Anastasia from ICCA. Over to you, Matthias.
Thank you very much, Brenda, and thank you very much for giving you the floor, and thank you to SAICM Secretariat and co-facilitators for making these discussions possible. Sorry, I had some technical problems. I have to come back to the first. EU and its member states are not in favor mixing the title issues of concern else, like issue of interest or etc. Coming definition, I agree with the many speakers, or the EU and MS agree with the previous speakers. We are also in favor to use the current definition and to further advance it to align with SDG 12.4, and in particular addressing or allowing to address all adverse effects, not only the significant ones. So capture explicitly waste, not only the chemicals or the chemicals related waste. That's it for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias, and well noted that you also had a comment about the title. I then have Anastasia from the ICCA. Anastasia, you have the floor.
Hi, ICCA does support the intervention by Norway and others that it would be simpler to keep the existing definition for issues of concern. We note that it would be important to make sure that these issues are of international concern and that it wouldn't preclude us from taking a review of the existing EPIs under the new SAICM, but we agree that it would be simpler to keep the existing definition.
Great, thank you, Anastasia. I don't see anyone else asking for the floor on the topic of the definition. So we will move to the topic of criteria, and I pass over to you, Sam, if you have anything to say or anything to close off as we move to criteria, Thomas.
Yes, thank you very much, Brenda. to all participants. I think we'll be having a lively discussion. To the criteria as also provided, and perhaps I would not like to comment on it, but I just give the floor to you. We can hear from our colleagues as well. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we're moving to criteria and waiting for our eager participants to take the floor on criteria. Thank you, Sam. Okay, I see two people asking the floor. The government of Japan, Suki. I see Bob Diedrich from the OECD. So if we could open up both speakers. And then Norway, I see Auden from Norway. So first, if I can go to the government of Japan, Suki, followed by Bob Diedrich, followed by Auden from Norway. Suki, you have the floor. Okay, maybe for a moment, I'll just pass the floor to Bob Diedrich from the OECD, and we'll get back to Suki. Bob, do you have the microphone?
We are muted. This is Suki from government of...
Perfect. Hello, Suki. You're first, then to Bob, and then...
Thank you very much for your effort. And it was really interesting and informative to learn all the comments on definition. And we are very open for the suggestion, and we would like to learn more about it. But for the criteria, though, we Japan thinks that the criteria should explain how to screen proposal. Therefore, the necessary conditions should be included here rather than sufficient conditions. We have made, we actually submitted a comment, and we are one of them among those 12 inputs. And we made a significant proposal, a significant change in this section, because we thought all the item listed in here should be included in necessary information. Yeah, that's it for now. Here.
Thank you very much, Suki from Japan. We then move to Bob Diedrich from OECD, followed by Norway, Auden. Over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Brenda. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Perfect. First, I need to apologize. We didn't manage to send in written comments. My main comment here on the criteria is that the post-2020 framework should not be just about commitments and obligations, but it should also be about opportunities for working together and opportunities for getting help. So I have the feeling that in terms of criteria for issues of concern, there should be just one criterion, which is the demand. If there are sufficient number of countries or regions that are interested in either working together or that believe that help is needed, that should suffice as a criterion. I do agree with Johanna when she said that we always need to focus our action on where we have the biggest possibility for success of outcome. But that should be part of the formulation and the definition of the action. In terms of criteria, I think that the demand should be the only one that trumps all of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. I then have Norway, Auden, followed by Pan, Susan, followed by the United States, Laura, followed by Alison Kennedy from Canada. So floor is over to you, Norway, Auden. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. In our view, the information provided in a nomination in accordance with the section on information requirements should be assessed relative to the definition. And in that case, the role of the current criteria is unclear. It leads to duplication of the text, and more than anything, the criteria would limit what issues that we are in position to address. So we therefore would like to propose to delete the section on criteria and move selected points to the section on information requirements instead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Auden. Next speaker is Susan from PAN, followed by Laura from the United States, followed by Allison Kennedy from Canada. Susan, PAN, Pesticide Action Network, you have the floor.
Okay, do you hear me? Yeah, thank you, Brenda. Thanks to everyone. Yeah, we did submit a joint comment with other NGOs, and we think that there's a need to add some criteria because they are not covering what is needed in total. So, and we think first that it should be on adverse effects on human health. So the introduction to the criteria and on health and or the environment, and that adverse effects on human health and the environment in at least 3 of the following criteria should be met. So that is what we had already proposed. But then it should be harm to vulnerable populations, not only populations, and ecosystem impacts, and also intergenerational effects and ability of spreading widely, for example, via supply chain for products, and environmental contamination, we think should be added as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan from PAN. I then move to Laura Nazareth from the United States, followed by Allison Allison Kennedy from Canada. Laura, you have the floor, US.
Thank you. We think it's important to have clear and concise criteria. We've also proposed some changes in our written submission to include issues of interest. And then a note on criterion A, we think that we're looking at broader issues, so it would not be appropriate to include specific chemical properties. And as well, we think the issues should be relevant to at least the majority of regions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Laura. I then have Allison Kennedy from Canada, followed by Matthias from the European Union. Go ahead, Allison.
Thanks, Brenda. We addressed some of this issue and criteria in our submission, but essentially we'd like to see criteria that would lead to a successful collaboration and efforts that are best suited to work in this forum. We found that some of the criteria and the information requirements that are described in the text are unnecessarily rigid. They would limit important issues coming forward. For example, as mentioned by the previous speaker, there's substance-specific criteria in A. We also thought there's a lot of overlap between the criteria and the information requirements sections. And so there's an opportunity to streamline those. And a lot of those information requirements are things that could be combined or have proponents address when they put forward a submission to describe the kind of work that can be done there. Essentially, we'd like a nomination process that's rigorous and robust enough to ensure that we're focused on the most appropriate issues that this forum can make progress on, but not so demanding and complicated that it creates barriers to nomination. And we also want to make sure that we could benefit from having that horizon scanning approach that's mentioned in the UNEP report. How would we identify those potential emerging issues and bring them into consideration? And so that's something that could be considered in this criteria section. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Allison. I then have 3 speakers, Matthias from the EU, followed by ICCA, Chile, followed by Claire from the United Kingdom. So first, Matthias from the European Union.
Yes, thank you for giving us the floor. Just some general comments, because we also made feedback I want to reference to. I just want to mention that we see the as they are down just as guiding information, no requirements that have to be fulfilled, that account to minimum of regions that which or stakeholders read it like that. That we don't want. Yeah, we don't see a need that this criteria are fulfilled, and of course we do not see a need that a minimum of women regions is affected by an issue. And depending on the overall outcome, here it's worth to consider what Norway already mentioned and to see there's really added value by the criteria we could find agreement on in comparison to the definition and the information requirements we already have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias. I then have ICCA, Sheila, asking for the floor, followed by Claire from the United Kingdom, followed by Michelle from Switzerland. So over to you, Sheila, ICCA.
Yes, thank you, Brenda. We, ICCA, supports suggestions by others to streamline these criteria. Actually, we would really recommend to eliminate this whole list of criteria and keep the criteria rather broad to allow for flexibility. Currently, what we see is a mix of, intrinsic properties and toxicological endpoints. It's really far too narrow. And the other thing we'd like to keep, however, is the notion of significant adverse effects, just to warrant consideration as an issue of international and major concern. Otherwise, we're just discussing or we're reviewing potential concerns which may or not have adverse effects on people and the environment. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Sheila. We then have Claire from the United Kingdom, followed by Michelle, Switzerland, followed by Gilbert, IPEN. Over to you, Claire, United Kingdom.
Thank you again. So broadly, just would like to agree with the sentiment from the US, Canada, Norway, and the ICCA in that the criteria that are listed below reflect only specific substances or groups of substances. And we want to make sure that broader issues are captured under this framework in line with the current list of emerging policy issues or issues of concern. So we believe that nominations should broadly group with three basic principles, and that is the need to determine whether it's an issue, then whether it is global or international, and then whether action is needed. So those should be the broad principles for nomination rather than criteria. And with this in mind, we think we could remove the criteria section and combine with information requirements. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. UK, I now have Switzerland, followed by IPEN, Gilbert, followed by UNIDO, Gabby, followed by Jacqueline from UNEP. So Switzerland, Michelle, have the floor.
Thank you, Brenda. Switzerland would like to join the previous speakers that have requested this criteria section be deleted. We too believe that the definition and information requirements that we have had up to now should be used to evaluate the information submitted, and that therefore this section that we are currently discussing is not needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So in the interest of time, I'm going to close off the speakers list after IPEN, Gilbert, UNIDO, Gabby, Engemann, followed by Jacqueline, UNEP. So over to you, Gilbert, and then we move to section 3. Gilbert?
Thank you, Brenda. IPEN would like to support the suggestion made by the previous colleague on deleting part of the criteria that relate to the chemical intrinsic property. And we'll also like to note that the set of the criteria to nominate an issue of concern proposed in are comprehensive. However, their prescriptive nature may not accommodate further issue of concern having characteristics that fall outside of these criteria. For instance, women and chemical safety, microplastic, and other issues. So in addition, as written, lack of data appear to exclude selection of an issue, but this does not take into consideration the data generation capacity gap in developing countries and countries in transition. In contrast, the Agri-ICCM2 criteria provide flexibility in ICCM decision-making, including the ability to encompass a variety of topics. Thank you.
Thanks, Gilbert. Next, we have Gabby from UNIDO, followed by Jacqueline from UNEP, and then we close the speakers list. Over to you, Gabby.
Thank you, Brenda, and welcome to everyone. Nice to hear so many familiar not see, but hear voices. And I would love to see actually Chilhanna's gray hair. So, but if you can, maybe we have the opportunity to meet. We can just support, I think for us, it's very important that this issue of complementarity stays there, that these issues complement other initiatives that are going, so that we don't duplicate efforts. That goes also in the sense to use the existing resources efficiently. It should be also an inclusive process. So when we look now at these criteria, we are not sure if that's very inclusive and allows all stakeholders really to submit a proposal. So we see also a lot of benefits to have a streamlined process where we would have the definition and then go directly to the section on information required for a submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabby. Just before I give the floor to Jacqueline, I just want to point out that in the chat, we have noted that there is a technical briefing on the UNEP report on issues of concern scheduled for the 26th of November. I note that I believe it was Switzerland that raised this in their intervention, how helpful that report is. Those invitations for that technical briefing will go out shortly, but it is a report that's been prepared by Jacqueline and her team, and I just want to take note of it before her intervention. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Thank you very much, Brenda. And now this is the publicity time, so there will be also a technical briefing within the governance virtual working group this Thursday on science policy. And as this topic relates, and there is a question particularly about how issues of concern might be linked to science policy, subsidiary bodies, or other groups, I'm just taking the time to say it. Sorry for that. Publicity time, as you were referring to. No, the UNEP's point goes mainly to support other speakers when they were referring and suggesting to delete this session of criteria. We really understand that this can go mainly to the next section. Some of the elements and criteria in general. We are in a way willing to highlight two aspects. One is the use of the word significant, and we have some examples like the nano and the significant adverse effects, which are still a big question mark, but nevertheless nano is still part of the emerging policy issues. So just some food for thought for further discussion, I hope. And the other one is the complementarity aspect that my colleague from UNIDO highlighted. Though we fully support complementarity, we also believe that we might need to have, in some occasions, a broad picture and the big picture aspects. If we are dealing with a little piece of the puzzle, but not looking at what his story behind it is, then we might be not being able to help or contribute to solve problems. And we have seen that with the plastics agenda, we have seen that with electronics agenda, we have seen that with EDC's agenda, trying to solve one little part or being complementing might not be enough. So thank you for the opportunity to make these comments.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I have one last speaker before we close this session, this part of the session on the criteria. Over to Olga Sporinskaya. If Olga's microphone can be unmuted, and then we will move on to part 3 on information requirements. Olga, you have the floor.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. So we provided like detailed comments to the text, both the definition and the criteria. I hope you received it. Just very briefly to the definition, we believe that It is better to remove the word significant because it could complicate the approval of additional issues of concern, but our rationale is in the paper. Regarding the criteria, we believe that it is very important to include such criteria as the issue has impact on the possibility of meeting the Agenda 2030 goals and related targets, as well as a number of targets under other international agreements, such as the Convention on Biological Diversity and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. This will help to address very important aspects and it's a good criteria for nominating issues of concerns. And also the issue of concern should have impacts on the possibility of fulfilling the 11 basic elements of the overall orientation and guidance. And I believe that these two criteria should definitely stay in the list. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. I think at this point, Sam, I will close the speakers for criteria. Do you have any comments as we move over to information requirements? Over to you for a moment, Sam, as to introduce this. After we then we move into the speakers list for part 3.
Yes, thank you so much, Brenda, and thanks so much, participants. It's been very interesting, and I can see a lot of interventions about moving the criteria aspect to information requirement. That means that the information requirement is a very important aspect of our work. So now we must we therefore move to that aspect, and then we want to see a lot of intervention as well. I mean, how best we can maybe collapse it with the criteria if possible. But this is a very important aspect. So shall we have the interventions from colleagues as well, Brenda?
Thank you, Sam. I'm just waiting for some people to raise their hands in the chat box or raise their name. I don't see anyone yet. Oh, okay. I see Marta from Norway. So if we could give the floor to Marta from Norway, please, Marta, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And hello again. Yes, as we indicated a bit under the previous section and that many people indicated, we think that selected points from the criteria section should be moved to the section on information requirements so that they can help guide the development of nomination dossiers. And we also propose to strengthen the science policy link by adding as a requirement to describe the extent to which concern is raised over the issue by the scientific body should one be established. And in this, we include in its horizon scanning and early warning analysis. And for issues that are nominated based on their harmful properties, such properties should be described and assessed as a part of the information requirements. We also think that in this section, it would be needed to include information on work plans on the different issues that we will come back to when we comment on mechanisms for implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Maybe we don't have very many comments on this section. I don't see anyone else with their hands up at this point. Oh, I see Laura from the United States. Let's give the floor to Laura. And people, please raise your hands because we'll close this quickly to move on to the next section. Laura, you have the floor.
Thank you. We think this section is largely duplicative of the information requested for the nomination section, so we don't think the separate section is needed. We think that individual items not covered in the nomination section could be moved there from this section, and we propose some changes in our written submission. One point I wanted to point out was that the MEAs have distinct mandates, and it wouldn't be the purview of SciComm to assess whether they are successful in addressing issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga, thank you, Laura. I have Gilbert from IPEN, and then I have UNEP, followed by Suki. So first, Gilbert, over to UNEP. Yep, so over to you, Gilbert.
Thank you again, Brenda. I don't believe that the current text is quite prescriptive, as it is. And then in contrast, the ICCM2 criteria that has been successfully used in the second process since 2009 asks proponent to include
We seem to have lost Gilbert. I don't hear him. Gilbert? Okay, maybe we'll make sure we get him back and we'll move over. Oh, Gilbert, you cut out on us.
Delegates. Sorry?
You cut out on us. Could you start over?
Sorry?
Maybe just continue. So you cut out on us a little
Hello,
bit.
Brenda?
Maybe submit. Hello, do you hear us, Gilbert? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you, and you can hear me? Hello?
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yes, I was saying that the current text is really prescriptive. In contrast, the ICCM2 criteria that has been successfully used in the second process since 2009 asks proponent to include a description of proposed action to be considered in moving forward on emerging policy issue, including a rationale for how proposed action will address the emerging policy issue identified. So in many ways, this entire section is redundant to the section on criteria above and could be simplified or deleted. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, Gilbert.
For hearing me, I suppose.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Jacqueline from UNEP, followed by Zuki from South Africa. So Jacqueline, you have the floor, followed by Zuki. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Brenda. Yes, we have the same issue as mentioned by some previous speakers regarding the need to have this information requirement with such description. But two elements here. One is that if there are new issues that we are bringing into the framework or to the new instrument, they should also be links not only to the vision, but also how they fit the indicators, the targets and indicators framework as well. In a way or the other, what has happened with emerging policy issues is that the perception was that how did it really relate to the GPA? It was relating mainly to the OPS, the overarching policy strategy. But at the end, there was a kind of divorce. So if we are bringing in new issues, we really need to identify where, in our understanding, they fit into the targets and indicators or the strategic objectives that we are discussing. And that's one element. And the other one is that information requirements should also somehow assess the possibility of implementing things. Though identifying emerging policy issues has really been a successful process within SciChem, the implementation aspects were not that much. And the evaluation indicates many issues like funding, for example, or capacity to deliver, but information requirements should also help trigger the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. I see I have one speaker left and I want to close the floor unless I have anyone else step forward. So I want to give the floor over to Zuki, last but not least.
Thank you, Brent. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good morning and good evening. Sorry, I joined in late. I'm from the other POPs Waste meeting I had to join. I am concurring with some of the colleagues in terms of prescription. What we're looking for here is a guidance, not prescriptive such that then it limits. We have above criteria 1A, whereby you have all these intrinsic characteristics. For example, for one to prove toxicity, that would have to be unproven through showing that there are adverse effects. So there's kind of redundancy, or not mere, kind of like mere repetition, but we shouldn't make this difficult. For example, somebody then may not necessarily know how to show that, a country rather, show that which they found to be toxic or being an EDC. How does it link at a sectoral level? We should be able to make it feasible, particularly for developing countries. With due respect to the co-chairs and the secretariat, one thing I don't see up in the criteria, I know we have moved, is synergistic effects. I don't see that. It's very important to have synergistic effects. Why is that? There are chemicals that alone, they behave in a certain manner, but when they find themselves in an environment with others, they behave in a slightly different manner than they would if they were to be alone or then in an environment. A typical case of that is cadmium, what it does to reproduction. So there are those cases. I think we'd be missing a lot if we were to leave out in the criteria the synergistic effects of a chemical, other than the basic intrinsic characteristics, is showing to have synergistic effects that ordinarily you would see, things that you wouldn't see if you were to be alone. So simply put, in this section 3, we should not make it too prescriptive, because we will be missing out some things or limiting nominations that could otherwise be fitting the criteria up there. But because they are not fitting some of these prescriptive A, B, C, E, D, F, then we lose out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suki. And I have one last speaker, Suki from Japan. Over to you, Suki from Japan, and then we will close the speakers list and move to part 4. Suki?
Very much. We have already mentioned that we have moved significant portions from criteria to information requirements. And additionally, we propose to include in information requirements that the proposed lead agency and also a work plan that includes at least one proposed target and an indicator to assess the progress. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Suki. And with that, I think I close the speakers list and move to point 4 on mechanisms for adoption of issues of concern and monitoring their progress. Okay. So next topic, I pass over to you, Thomas or Sam, as we close. Up to you.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you to everyone for a very fruitful and rewarding discussion so far. This is very useful, providing a lot of input to Sam and me when we're trying to push ahead on this very important part of the Beyond 2020 instrument. So, item number 4, mechanisms for adoption of issues of international concern and for monitoring their progress. As previously mentioned, it's a pretty large chunk of the entire paper. It's rather complex to move into. Due to the time constraints, we need to address all of it in one big part. I hope that's acceptable to everyone. And Brenda, I'm opening the floor for input. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Thomas. I'm just waiting to see some hands go up. Maybe we have this section perfect. All right, I see Bob from OECD. Bob Diedrich, could we open the floor for Bob, followed by Martha from Norway. Thank you, Bob, for taking the first.
Thank you, Brenda. I think one of the lessons learned from the current emerging policy issues was that, let's say, the end game was not always clear from the beginning. In some cases, it was about raising awareness in as many countries as possible. In other cases, it was about the reduction of the use of certain chemicals. And I think that wasn't always clear from the beginning. It, let's say, the end game evolved with the work as it was ongoing. So I think one thing that should be very clear, that should be part of the information that is submitted, is what is the end game, what is the ultimate objective of the collaborative work, and then going into the type of action that is needed to meet that objective. I think that is somehow missing somewhere in this in the items that need to be provided for deciding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Over to you, Martha from Norway. I don't see anyone else on the list yet. Martha from Norway.
Thanks again, and sorry for ruining the perfectness of this section. So just first, a little comment is just that we see that the title of the section does not cover all parts of the content in the section, as mechanisms of implementation and criteria for further work are not included in the heading. So maybe consider including that in the title. And then a more general comment, we see a need, or the Beyond 2020 instrument needs to consider carefully its available capacity to deal with additional activities. To a large extent, this will depend on resources made available by the proponents and co-sponsors of a new issue of concern. The Beyond 2020 instrument should not add new tasks without sustainable resources and a viable work plan. In our view, the selection of nominated issues of concern for adoption should be based on an evaluation relative to the definition we choose and not according to a set of criteria, as we have already mentioned. Furthermore, we do not see the need to prioritize the already adopted issues of concern beyond a consideration of the need for further work on an issue according to the procedure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norway. I see two more speakers. I see the European Union, Matthias, followed by Alison Kennedy from Canada. Matthias, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. I don't want to repeat all our written comments, and just to make some general note by the EU and its member states, we think this section needs much more discussion. And should take into account closely the procedures foreseen with regard from nomination to adoption by ICCN, as they are laid down in the annex to ICCN 2.4. What EU and member states would focus on is that we see a need, and it should be clearly pointed out, that ICCM should prioritize, should adopt time-bound work plans to vary afterwards if such work plan has to be developed. And furthermore, we see a need for a review of progress, because we are of the opinion that will increase the efforts and the action on an issue of concern. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthias. So my current speakers list is Alison, Canada, Jill Hanna from GAP, US, Laura Nazareth, and from Japan, Suki. Okay, Alison Kennedy for Canada.
Thanks, Brenda. On this section, we see a gap where there's no clear process. I'll try again. There we go. In this section, there's a gap where there's no clear process for evaluating the nominations. We would suggest that nominations could be brought to the OEWG or whatever the subsidiary body is going to be to discuss the level of interest, the available resources, the priority for the issue, and the possible path forward. You know, whether it's going to be setting up some kind of ad hoc working group to develop a work plan, identify implicated stakeholders, etc. But that should happen before it's brought to ICCM, and that's not discussed in this section. Also, we think the process needs to be transparent. It needs to allow for participation of all sectors and all stakeholders. As well, given that the new framework should focus on issues where this forum is best positioned to make progress on them and offer its unique contribution, We think there should also be a process to determine the need for further work on any of the issues, and once progress has been made, that we have that step. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I just want to point out we have about 13 minutes before the hour, and we have currently 5 speakers on the list. So I have Jill Hanna now, followed by United States, followed by Suki, Japan, followed by Zuki, South Africa, followed by Michelle from Switzerland. Jill Hanna, you have the floor. Please keep your interventions short.
I will. Thank you very much. Just 2 points. Like Canada, we think all stakeholders should be involved. This is the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution. We are a bit concerned with the bracketed sentence about to promote the nominating issues of international the communication at the national level. Nominations should be communicated to focal points. We could imagine cases where an NGO stakeholder wants to bring something forward, and the national focal point is very against that, and we wouldn't like that communication requirement to be a barrier to presentation by the civil society. So that's one thing where we think language will have to be looked at very carefully. The other point is to agree with those who are concerned about some kind of prioritization. It seems perfectly reasonable, as many NGOs have called, not to talk about significant adverse effects, but just adverse effects. But we do think that during this nomination and selection process, the extent of the effects on human health and on the environment, insofar as it can be measured, should be measured. Thank you.
Thank you, Gab. I then turn over to US, Laura Nazareth, followed by Suki, Japan, and then Zuki, South Africa. Laura?
Thank you. We have proposed a number. There's a problem with the audio. Let's see, I'll try again. We've proposed a number of edits in our written submission, but I wanted just to raise a few main points. One is that we believe the adoption of the issue should be done by the international conference. We don't think prioritization among issues is necessary except during the process to determine the need for further work on an issue. We think it's important that nomination packages include an overall proposed timeline for the issue and also a basic work plan that can be revised later after the issue is adopted. Another thing we think is important is to have multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral support and sponsorship for an issue. And then finally, for the process to determine the need for further work on an issue, this should be done by the international conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Next speaker is Suki from Japan, followed by Zuki from South Africa. Suki?
Thank you. So Japan understood from the text of section 4 that the selection process starts from nomination. The submission of the proposal. Then Secretariat screens such proposals to select the potential IOC to be submitted to ICCM. So Japan would like to propose that during this process to make the information of the potential IOC available in the public and invite comments from any stakeholder minimum 6 months before ICCM to allow stakeholders to make scientific assessment as such. The proposal and comments from the stakeholders shall be submitted together for the final consideration at ICCM. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. I have 4 speakers, and I think we want to then close off the speakers list. So anyone last who wants to still speak should let us know. I have Zuki, South Africa, Michelle, Switzerland, Sheila from ICCA, followed by Olga Svorinskaya. Zuki, you have the floor.
Thank you, Brenda. Here, I think the most important thing is to ensure that we protect vulnerable groups or vulnerable governments, for example. We have seen how at times a nominator would find themselves being forced to withdraw some of a crucial scientific information that they would have, for example, that that says to promote communication. I don't think we should have it there, because although we're saying it's to promote communication, but it sounds like also can be read as if you want the focal point kind of like to endorse the nomination, and it ought not to be so, because government and NGOs are equally important stakeholders within the SciCam regime. So you don't want the one feeling like maybe they kind of need an endorsement of a focal point, so to speak. And the other issue is particularly academics. They would pick up these things and not necessarily have a government that is prioritizing those possible emerging issues. And then also the issue that was raised by Jill, adverse effects are adverse effects, because then they need to start talking about significance. At what level of significance? The mere fact that it has been proven that there are adverse effects caused by whatever emerging issue, that should suffice. Another issue for us is the issue of the report. First, the SciCam independent reviewer, whereby it indicates why did we not succeed, and also the recent one by UNEP that had a briefing recently. I'm speaking to prioritization. That prioritization, what does it mean? Is it because somebody said we should prioritize only when there's a possible need of further work? But we know for a fact that legacy emerging issues have not been dealt with, and the UNEP report indicated that one of the reasons that those were not dealt with, most of those were found to be developing countries rather than in developed countries, and probably they didn't get much priority. I may not get the exact wording, but the message is clear there. So prioritization, we're not certain what would that entail, but also we need to bring in what has been found in these reports, the independent review of SciCam, also the UNEP report, so that we don't repeat the same mistakes. Somehow we need to bring the main outputs from those reports. I'll end there. Thank you, Brent.
Thanks, Suki. I have 3 more speakers. I've got Michelle from Switzerland. Michelle, you have the floor.
Thank you, Brenda. With regard to this section 4, Switzerland would like to flag that we have submitted in written form a proposal that is pertinent for some of the aspects under this section. And in very brief, the proposal is to establish time-bound task forces or working group for each of the issues, so that there can be monitoring ensured and ensure that the work moves forward. These groups for each issue, they would have a work plan and have indicators. They would coordinate with other groups of other issues and with stakeholders and the Secretariat. They would monitor and evaluate the progress achieved for the issues, and they could also make recommendations to the ICCM on how to further go on with these issues. And we would be very happy to have some more time to explain the proposal in more detail at the future session of this group. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. So 2 last speakers. We've got ICCA Sheila, followed by Olga Sporenskaya. Sheila, you have the floor.
Thank you, Brenda. The ICCA supports Canada's comments that a process for evaluating the nominations is needed. We propose that a new science policy interface under the future SciCam could, for example, be responsible for evaluating those nominations and making a recommendation. The final decision, however, should be with the ICCM. And finally, we also we are interested in hearing more about Switzerland's idea on establishing these time-bound partnerships, which could be a good model for collaboration on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Last speaker in this round, then I have Olga Sporenskaya. Olga.
Thank you, Brandon. So we agree with the EU that a regular monitoring of progress is needed, and that would increase the efforts and action on issues of concern. And we believe that all stakeholders shall report periodically on the actions they have taken to implement the relevant parts of the work plan, and stakeholders shall provide the reason why they have not carried out the agreed actions. And also, in addition, we think that an establishment of a multi-stakeholder subsidiary body for each issue of concern should be charged with developing a work plan and providing technical assistance to countries in the implementation of the relevant parts of the work plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Bear with me. I think we have one more speaker. It's Audun from Norway, and you're the last to take the floor. Audun?
Yes, thank you very much, and sorry for taking the floor again. We actually thought we were going step by step through the section 4. That's why. I just wanted to raise our support for Switzerland's proposal for work plan, and also for the formation of multi-stakeholder committees to support these work plans. We think this is a very good point, and our main idea with the issues of concern is that we want to see more action and more progress on each of the issues adopted. And I also briefly want to mention partnerships. The compilation text contains the concept of partnerships to address issues as decided by the ICCM, and we see the potential to address issues through partnerships along the lines of what is currently done under the Basel Convention on the transboundary movement of hazardous waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Audun, from Norway. I think that is all the speakers under section 4, so I pass the floor back to you, Thomas, in closing this part off.
Thank you very much, Brenda. And wow, we seem to be finishing on time. That's quite an achievement. I'd like to thank you all for a very fruitful and constructive discussion. A lot of input for Sam and me in producing what is to be an outcome document from this group. Brenda, would you like me to take us through the very last slide, or would you do it?
I think we should turn the last slide over to Sam, so if the Secretariat could move to the final slide on the next steps, agenda item 6. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks so much, Brenda, and thanks so much, Tom. As you said, I think we've made it within the scheduled time, which is actually very impressive. And we thank all participants for their commitment. So on the agenda item 6, the next steps, I think by Monday, 30th November, that's the last day of the month, we should have our draft proposal to be released. And Thomas and I are to release a draft proposal for consideration of the group on how to address existing policy, emerging policy issues based on the feedback we received from the call for written inputs and also from today's discussion. So I think that will be on course, and the draft will be posted on the SciChem website, and then there will be electronic feedback as well. So we await, I think it's in 2 weeks' time, yes, it should be done. And then our next meeting actually will be on Monday, the 14th of December, 2020, close to Christmas. But we expect that all of us will join. Today, I could see that as many as 120 plus participants joined the meeting. It's very impressive. So on that day, we'll review the draft proposal prepared by Thomas and myself, and also how to deal with the existing EPIs and also other issues of concern. So I would want to say thank you very much also from my side, and it's good afternoon here, and then to all of you who joined. Thank you so much. So Brenda, something else to be done?
I think we can close the meeting. It's very impressive, 4:01. Thank you, Sam and Thomas. Thank you, participants. We will put the information, this presentation, up on the website, and there will be a short report of this meeting available. But thank you very much, everyone, and I think we can close the meeting from here.
So thank you, and I wish you well until we meet again. Please be on the lookout and check on the website by 30th of this month. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Thomas.
Merci.